Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's talk here, Rise of Big Data Governance, Insight from this emerging trend from active open source initiatives. I'm between you and the end of the conference here, so thanks for sticking with it, and hopefully showcase some interesting stuff to you of some of the work that we're doing in the data governance space. First off, oops, that's the wrong button there. First off, me. My name is John Mertic. I'm Director of Program Management for the Linux Foundation. As part of my role here, I help run ODPi, which is a foundation Hortonworks, IBM, and other vendors you saw here present this week and participate in the community showcase. Participate in driving standards around big data technologies. And in particular here, we're talking about a new initiative that we've been working on around data governance. And let me put a little context maybe into the world we're at with data governance. I'm sure a number of you came to this talk knowing that you're struggling with this. You have a number of different enterprise catalogs. You have amazing amounts of data coming in, and you have nothing but new regulatory compliances coming at you. Well, let's imagine something. Imagine that catalog had everything in it, where it was located, understood all of those attributes there. But the better point is no matter where your data resides, it's cataloged, right? Imagine that there's tools such that any of the vendor catalogs, and each of you, and for the end customers and end users in the room, I imagine it's data catalogs, it's not catalog, it's multiple you have running in your organization from either legacy RDMS, SaaS tools, things of that nature. What if all those tools were able to communicate with one another? Share metadata back and forth. If one tool didn't have it, the other could give you the details of it. Any of your tools that sit on top of this layer, that they were able to communicate back, and they could hit any of these vendor metadata things. You're not locked into one. The APIs are all similar, are all the same, and they all knew how to connect with one another to find the metadata that's needed. And imagine that metadata, it's added in automatically as new data created. So this isn't a manual process. This isn't a person having to do that classification. This happens as the data is being ingested. So this can be possible. And this is something that we're working on here as an open source community here. So let's talk about this a little bit more. And here's a bit of the agenda, how we're looking to focus, how I'm going to focus today's talk here. We'll dig more into the metadata problem, and I'm going to probably raise a lot of points that you all will be shaking your heads up and down with, or at least I hope so. So we'll dig more into that and dig more to really where the true challenges are from a business driver point of view. We'll talk about how you can resolve this, and solving the metadata problem is nothing new. It's been tried and solved over the last 20 or 30 years. As long as there's been databases, the metadata challenge has been there. But we have a different approach, and we'll talk about that. And then we'll talk about the benefit for you as a data governance professional for engaging in this effort. So let's start at the very beginning of this story. Why on the earth do we even need metadata in the first place? What is even the value of this? And it usually comes down to how it comes down to answering the question of, when I'm outside of an application that has created the data, how do I know about what it's about? How do I know where it came from, what its characteristics are, what its properties are? And the properties and characteristics are an important thing, because then if you change that data, there's probably a number of processes that need to happen accordingly. Imagine the concept of a social security number, right? So if somebody enters a social security number in one of your line of business systems, and another line of business system needs to access it, what are the rules around that? Can they see the whole number? Can they see the last 4 digits? Can somebody change it? If somebody does change it, should there somebody know about that? All of these sorts of questions here that start to come when if you have your data within a single line of business system, all of that business logic can deal with it. But if you take that data out of the context of having that business system on top of it, all of a sudden that becomes a lot more complex. And the reality that we see out there is when we start to talk about this larger question of how data can be accessed and leveraged outside of sort of the native system where it comes from, the native flow, the reality is these platforms, they typically don't have metadata support. There's a lot of proprietary tools involved. These tools have sort of limited function action. They're sort of very much designed to operate within the ecosystem in which they're designed, but not so much outside of it. Data catalogs, and even if you just take the larger picture, there's always been this large dream in data. How can we get our hands wrapped around all of it? And they're always expensive efforts, whether it's EDW, whether it's data lake, there's tons of challenges in there. So, nonetheless, this is a big honking problem. The data platforms today, most of them are just trying to even just tackle the data locale and location thing, haven't even got into the question of the metadata half of things, or addressed it only in sort of similar localized ways, right? This has been a challenge. And if you would look at sort of a diagram of how all these tools fits together here, imagine your top layer there. Those are all your line of business tools, your BI tools, everything there that an end user is using to access data. That middle layer, in your data stores at the bottom, and that middle layer is your metadata catalogs that are describing all these tools, describing all these services, being able to do those governance actions, just being able to even describe what the data is. It's a garbled mess. It's a huge challenge, and organizations end up having to sort of pay the price because they have to replicate a lot of different efforts across. They have to maintain a lot of disparate systems. And more importantly, that also constrains the ability to build BI tools on top of it, or even just other line of business tools, because you kind of have to be careful of where you're getting your data from so you make sure you have all the right pieces applied. So, as we came together with this group, and as this group really wanted to form what it's all about and the challenge out there, this 5-piece metadata governance manifesto, sorry, I'm tripping over my words here, I should get some water. It became apparent that we needed to put a stake in the ground. That group decided, that community said, we need to put a stake in the ground of what is important here and what must be achieved for really getting success. And it came down to really 5 key points. First is the maintenance of metadata has to be automated, right? Humans just don't scale in this. With the amount of data coming in, I've used in other presentations this chart of just the inflow of data where the big data problem is less of a processing speed discussion, but just the mere factor that the fire hose is coming at you. Thank you very much, J-random Internet of Things advice like the smart refrigerator to the smart mirror throwing, umpteenth amounts of data at you. No human's going to keep up, and no company can even staff the humans to keep up with it. So it must be an automated process. The management has to be ubiquitous. It can't be every tool out there for itself. It can't have tons of proprietary formats. It needs to be a ubiquitous format to keep up with. The access has to be open, has to be remotely available, and remotely even just within different tools within the organization. The metadata it can't be just each metadata repository is its own silo. They need to be interconnected. They need to be able to share with each other. The metadata within itself needs to be able to define and drive that governance of data. So it's not just the metadata is just a descriptor of this is a social security number, but of, because, with this social security number, you can do this, this, and this. If it changes, this, and this must happen, right? All of that needs to be tied into one. And 5, I think, is a really interesting one, is that discovery and maintenance of metadata has to be an integral part of all the tools. Everything in there, right? The metadata has to be first and foremost, because that means from a business standpoint, you can you can drive regulatory compliance, you can drive business change management, you can drive all of that from the metadata layer, and all the rest of the tools will be able to adhere to that. So if we want to go back to this earlier diagram here, where we had the repositories, the tools, what needs to change, and where we see this as this middle layer here. How can we build this layer, and this is where the focus of this project ends up being, is this middle layer for having a standard way to connect and leverage the metadata repositories, and for the BI tools to standardly connect within them, right? And this is what the focus of the work we're doing here is, sort of building this layer. Oops, sorry, I put my finger over here. This layer, open and unified metadata, which can connect those BI tools at the top out to a number of different metadata repositories and actually be able to leverage data in between them. And so you don't need to know where they all are at. You can use this API for doing the hard work. So there's a couple of pieces to this, and a little of this is slightly out of date here, so bear with me, but it is concurrent with a little bit of how Apache 1.0 is rolling out here. But the gist of it here is Apache Atlas, we're serving as a reference implementation for the way that this sort of pattern is going to be going forward here. And it comes in a couple of different pieces. I mean, one is the existing Apache Atlas metadata server that will be a part of that. Second is the automation half of things, of the managing the discovery and store and all of that. But I find what's really interesting here is sort of this last part, is this connectivity here, right? Atlas will be able to communicate with a number of different repositories that adhere, and if we go back to this sort of standard here at the top that can talk to this, that can talk to this service, it will be able to communicate with those different repositories, so that if somebody sends a query for a piece of data here and it says, oh, well, Atlas doesn't have that. Atlas doesn't have the repository and the metadata on that. It's going to be able to go ask some of these other repositories if it has it, and respond right to the user there. So you can actually have a single endpoint, or actually, for that matter, any of these metadata repositories can be a single endpoint for applications, but it will actually go out and find the metadata that you're looking for, right? And these are future functionality that's going into Atlas today. And there'll be a number of commercial applications and other tools that will also support that, so that actually all your metadata repositories will be able to federate with one another. So kind of giving a sense of what that lay of the land's looking like here. There's a number of BI tools that are working on implementing this. Power BI from Microsoft. There's a number of IBM tools that are working on that front here. We have a community now organized under an ODPi project called Agiria, which we aren't going to tear to the public, but you can look for it on GitHub, that is building out all of these centerpieces here. In a couple of different layers, one of a thin layer of an API, which any of these metadata repositories could go and implement. A second of a thicker sort of layer that could sit at a proxy between any metadata repository and a BI tool, so it can do a lot of those federation work and require little changes to the application. Or sort of the Atlas approach, where it's actually bringing all that code in very natively, and being able to integrate at a very high level there. But these are the pieces that are coming in here. As you can see, IBM and Atlas are two metadata repositories that they're going to start leveraging this. And we're looking at others from Microsoft and a number of other different vendors that are providing there. They're already looking into this and seeing how can they be a part of this as well. And we talked about how we're going about this, right? So we talked about the technology, but then what's the methodology? How are we attacking this problem? And there's been numbers of consortiums that have tackled data governance over the years. This is definitely not the first. We'd love it if it was the last, but it's definitely not the first. But the big thing that we're trying to do here is do this through the guise of open source. And what this ends up meaning, and if you think of all the talk you've heard probably about open source and some of these projects, it means we're less in a standards focus, which we are building standards here, but we're also building code first standards. Meaning we're getting that code in there. There's actual legs here. There's actual implementation code that people can take and work with. And we're doing this in an open community where anybody can participate. Anybody who has the expertise in this area, any organizations you see this is valuable to them, they're welcome to jump here and participate. And there's certainly work that's happening with the Atlas community. There's a ton of work that's happening in the ODPi community. And we're seeing a lot of also accessory communities as they're looking to build up their support for these tools and the support for this API and the support for this layer, that they're going to have pieces in here as well. And the other piece here, which ends up being unique, is this isn't an effort in a vacuum. We're co-creating it with the experts in this space. So this isn't something that we're dreaming up here from a pure product standpoint, but we're collaborating with people that know this area, that understand the subject matter, that live this day in and day out. So if you look at sort of the initial group of vendors in here, and this has already started to grow since I've had this slide here, there's a couple more vendors that are participating, SAS, Attunity, a number of others. But as you see here, we have different levels of the landscape here. We have from the Hadoop world, we have IBM bringing a lot of their data expertise from the many product lines that they're having. ING, a bank name, right? Somebody who's living this out day in and day out. And we're seeing just huge growth in there. But what's unique here is we have all sorts of different levels of collaboration. And this open source community that we're creating with an ODPi is a vehicle that's helping make that happen. So if you're sitting in here, you're probably in at least one of these two camps, hopefully. So if you look at an effort like this, and you're sitting in one of these camps, what are your benefits? Why are you doing this, right? If you're a data governance professional, here's your value. One is you can make sure your governance platform, your governance practice is in line with the best practices of what's done out there. And it immediately starts to have impact. You're immediately making sure not only you're doing work in a more regulatory compliance way, but you're also you're using the tide that lifts all boats to help you do things in a much more efficient manner. And it opens up the path for more tools, helping build better automated processes, and all of the pieces there that help your organization stay in compliance, in regulatory, but also help do better actions as well faster. If you're a vendor in this space, this just opens your door to helping you, position, your product better with organizations and help them being able to take advantage more of what you're bringing to market here. Both if you're in the metadata repository thing, but also in the BI vendor half of things. I mean, being able to tap in these APIs means that the organizations that are leveraging your tools will be able to be more effective very quickly. So not only your metadata offerings, in addition, one of the other things that this group is working on is a series of packages that will even sit on top of the API layers that will provide out-of-the-box metadata definitions and actions that companies can just go and start adopting. And that's a freebie that you end up getting as an organization that you can leverage. Along with conformance platforms that gives your customers assurance that you're playing in this ecosystem. You have a great offering here that extends beyond traditional vendor ecosystems. So where we're at with this right now, and as you can see here from the date here, we've really been doing a big push in the spring where we've been getting a lot of excitement going here in the ecosystem. I think there's two big things here, and this is even already out of date since I put these slides together here. There's two big things that are going on. One is the code project itself around the API layers. That there is making great traction, and we're starting to see collaboration between a few vendors in our ODPi GitHub repositories. The other thread there is around the practitioner side of things that are looking at what are the privacy packs, what are the different tools that we'll be building that sit on top of this, that are value add for the customers and the vendors. You can follow more of that discussion here. Our email list is at the bottom here, and I'll make my slides available afterwards for some of the details here as well. we are looking at Apache Atlas 1, which will be sort of the first release with an implementation of this. You can kind of follow some of the details there. But net we're really starting to push forward with here, and there's a number of different metadata tools that are coming on board that will be a part of this over time. So, and I guess then also the natural question here is, many people probably in this room recognize ODPi from writing Hadoop specs. So why the heck are we in the business of helping data governance? It's an excellent question. A little over a year ago, we did a bit of a survey out in the Hadoop world. Somewhat informal, some Twitter, a lot of talking with different vendors and customers, and really trying to collect a lot of data, mostly as we were trying to see where we needed to go next with the specs. And that specs work is still happening in the background. But the big thing is we wanted to understand sort of that state of the market there, so we knew if we were putting our efforts into certain baskets, what made sense. And what came back was really interesting. And again, put this in the context of late 2015 late 2016, early 2017. What we found was, I think, two things. One is there was never a great definition of what Hadoop in production was. Every single vendor at that time had a different numbers of percentage of what they felt enterprise penetration was. And it wasn't like a few percentage points off. We're talking wildly like 50 percentage points off. So we saw number problem one is there was no really good definition of what that looked like. And so then we said, let's focus and lay that out and figure that out and just put some definitions in there. And two, within the context of what a maturity model was, there also really wasn't a great definition. And so we looked to lay this out. And so we spent some time laying this out. You can look at this white paper on our website. It goes into a lot more detail here. But the net is an organization is implementing these technologies. They go through certain stages, and they tend to have the typical framework that even other technology adoptions have, where it's first a big focus on aligning the business user with the value the tool could have, so you have the visualization and velocity at the front end, and then the back end of aligning IT with it, right? So this is even classic mode 2, mode 1 IT, right? And the barrier to getting across the line here, this here, you get past this line here, and you're an enterprise-wide, you got mode 1 IT on your side. And the question that we kept having is, how do we get more deployments into here? Because 28% seems pretty low. So how do we get more over here? What are the true blockers? And we came back with two areas here. One is the storage and management, which we had some focuses around Embari and other tools, and we're starting to see Kubernetes taking over the world and really making a great impact there. So that's a huge stepping point there. And then security and governance. I mean, we saw as a gigantic blocker in this space. And so we said, there is not a great effort that is happening right now in this community, and we had folks coming to us in the community saying that we had some efforts that they thought that ODPi could be a great home for, and that's why we're here. That's the value we saw, and we started launching this project in the last part of last year, and now it's starting to really get a lot of momentum right now. And the value of doing it in this fashion, and again, if you look at the history of data governance in this area, there's been tons of consortiums, there's been tons of vendor-led efforts, and they all tend to crash and burn over a period of time. For us, we use a lot of the Linux Foundation model, and it's not maybe as hard to define it as an Apache way, but I think it's a philosophy of how we look at the world here, is that we build foundations to enable trusted innovation. And where we focus on is how do we get the needed projects and how do we just make them successful? How do we let those communities become successful, give them the tools that they need to be successful, such that vendors downstream start building products from this. Hortonworks, IBM, Attunity, SAS, others, they start to build this. And as they see the success of that on the market, they're going to drive profit from that. Or if you look at an ING, as they see the success in an effort like this helping reduce their costs, that's profit for them. And the profits for that work themselves back into the project through increased headcount investment and increased also funding investment, and the cycle continues. And so that's the model that we look at here. We keep the project technology end open. Vendors adopt this and build it through our compliance programs. The success of that drives more funding and vendors into the work into the project, and the cycle continues. So in the end, the success depends on members, developers, and infrastructures to get the technology that turn this into what the market will adopt. And that's what we're here to catalyze, and that's sort of the different angle that is different between consortiums that have done this in the past and what we're trying to do here. So I highly encourage you to get involved. You can learn about ODPi at our website, learn specifically around the data governance work. Also, we have a sub-page that's dedicated to that. Data governance PMC mailing list. I'd mentioned that earlier. You should definitely subscribe to that. It'll also help point you to the Slack channel as well, where there's a lot of discussion going on. And if you are an organization that sees, either if you're a vendor in this space that says, hey, you know what, I want to make sure my products can support this API and I can tell to the market that I'm in compliance with it, we should definitely talk, because getting your organization signed up as a member unlocks that ability for you. It doesn't prevent you from collaborating the technology, but it opens up your right to use the marks and use our compliance programs. And if you're a vendor, like if you're an end customer that says, boy, efforts like this is a part of my software supply chain, and this is an opportunity I have to have a distinct way of impacting my software supply chain. It's a term that John Mark Walter of Red Hat has used time and time again, and it's the ability of a vendor that their participation in open source actually lets them bring their use cases and the things that they need back into those projects as they're developing, and then they end up being the downstream beneficiaries, but they're able to drive that innovation based on their requirements versus the traditional method in a proprietary model of you come yell at your vendor enough and you hope they listen. That's interesting to you, join ODPi, and I'd be happy to talk to you about opportunities there as well. So I know we're at the end of the conference, so this thing here, I would not be surprised at all, and I'm not going to judge anybody if they fell asleep here, although it is the middle of the day, so I mean, come on. But any questions? And if you do have questions, I've been requested that if you come up to the microphone there so it can be recorded. Oh, Alan, seriously, you have a question? What kind of? Go for it. What license is this all done under? Excellent question. All of our code is under an Apache 2 license. With any of our specifications work, that is done under a Creative Commons license.
One point of clarification. All the stuff that we saw there is not in Apache 1.0. It's going to come right after Apache Atlas 1.0.
Oh, it's after. OK, my mistake.
To be very clear. Yeah, it's not that clear.
Like I said, my timelines were a little bit off there. There's been a lot of shifting pieces lately, and these people from DataWorks, they like their slides in early.
You haven't mentioned master data management. Do you see this as a completely separate thing?
It's a great question in here. I would say it's probably a little bit of a complementary effort, because that also gets into data location, data locale, and just all of those other pieces here. But certainly, it's gonna have complementary pieces. Oh, sorry, I didn't hear you there. Yep. And we could see a lot of those vendors also looking to participate in this effort. We've had discussions with RDMS vendors and folks like that see this as just sort of a natural pairing to their offerings. Any other questions? Thoughts? Where could you learn more about the architecture of it? So there's some links. So the question was, where can you learn a little bit more about the architecture of this? If you head on to, on the data governance VFC, we have links that point to some of the architectural documents, and hopefully we'll make sure it points to the latest ones, which are up on GitHub as well. You can check out ODPi. The Gira repository has a bunch of that code, and also the ODPi data governance PMC repository has bits there as well. Any other questions? And I'll be around a little bit afterwards if you want to come one-on-one to me as well. All right. Well, I can sense I got a crowd here that says they want to head home from a conference. So, thank you so much for sticking with me till the end here. I hope you all have enjoyed DataWorks Summit. This has been fun for everyone. There we go. All right. Thank you so much. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.